Okay, let's talk planes of section. Right? So sometimes in the anatomical sciences and medicine, it's very important for us to cut the body open and look down inside. Now, we don't just haphazardly just cut things open. We do so in a very sophisticated and meticulous manner. And we use specific terms to describe how we're looking at the body, how we've cut the body, where we're viewing it from, things like that. Right? So we call these planes of section, planes at which we section or cut the body. And as you can see up here, we've got the different planes of section. So the first one, the easiest one sort of to remember, is what we call a sagittal section. A sagittal section sort of makes it like this, right? And it divides the organism into right and left halves. Now remember, as a vertebrate, you are bilaterally symmetrical, meaning that your right side is a mirror image of your left side. So if I were to take a chainsaw, cut you in half exactly down the middle, slam you up against a mirror, you'd be a whole person again, right? So you're bilaterally symmetrical. And a sagittal plane divides you along that plane of symmetry, along that midline. Now, there's two types of sagittal sections that we talk about. There's a mid sagittal section, which is perfectly down the middle. Think chainsaw and mirror all over again. A parasagittal section is one that's off to the side. So imagine if I cut it, sort of over here, right? Off to the side of the midline. That would be a parasagittal section. So mid-sagittal along the midline, parasagittal off to the side. Okay. Now your frontal or your coronal section here, that's one that basically divides you into front and back, into anterior and posterior. So a frontal or a coronal section divides you into anterior and posterior, right? And so we can have anterior views, we can have posterior views, okay? The transverse section, this one here, divides you into top and bottom, or what we call superior up top, inferior down bottom. Right? So a transverse plane of section can give you a superior view looking from the top, or it can give you an inferior view looking up from the bottom. Now, if you've looked and paid attention closely, what you'll notice is that you have a long axis that runs along your body, right? Think of a rod running right down the center of you. That's your long axis. The sagittal and the frontal section are parallel to that. They run parallel to your long axis, up and down. The transverse section runs perpendicular to that, right? So those three types of sections run parallel or perpendicular to the long axis of the body. An oblique section, this one down here, is one that runs at any other angle that is not parallel or perpendicular to the long axis of the body. So that's what your oblique section is. So we have sagittal, right and left, coronal or frontal, front and back, anterior, posterior, and transverse, superior, inferior at parallel or perpendicular, and then oblique, any other plane that is not parallel or perpendicular. Okay. Now, if we look at these, this is just from a program called Anatomy app that you can use that shows the different planes of section. So here you have your transverse plane, superior, inferior. Here you have your sagittal plane. This is right and left. And then you have your frontal or your coronal plane into anterior and then posterior back here. Right? So this just shows it again, axial or transverse, superior and inferior, sagittal, right and left, frontal is anterior, and then posterior, right? Now, if we're looking at a quadruped, which is often used in the veterinary field, we use these as model organisms for human medicine. They're a little bit different because look where their long axis is, right? Their long axis is parallel, okay? So your sagittal plane, this one here, still divides it right and left. It's a vertebrate, so it's still bilaterally symmetrical, so you can have a mid-sagittal, parasagittal section, which is right and left of the dog. Okay? Your transverse, right, is perpendicular to that long axis. So it divides it into front and back, or in a quadruped, we're going to call this anterior and this posterior over here. Okay? Your dorsal section is equivalent to like the frontal section of a human. It's going to divide it into dorsal, back, and ventral, front. So dorsal and ventral, because those are the terms that we use in a quadruped. Okay. So if we look, right, we can now start to use these little directional terms and planes of section to look at things. So here we have an anterior view. So this is looking at the front. So imagine we cut the body, right, and we're looking at it from the front side. This is an anterior view. So if I wanted to see this, what plane of section would I have to make in a human to get this view? I'd have to cut the front side of the body off, right? So this would be a frontal or coronal plane of section, right? So take some time and learn those planes of section.